It's the most iconic scene in all of cartoon history. Lucy Van Pelt holds out that football and essentially asks Charlie Brown, why don't you kick that football? Now, Charlie Brown's not a fool. He knows that as soon as he goes to kick that football, Lucy's gonna pull it away from him. Yet Lucy's convincing, and eventually she gets Charlie Brown to go run after that football, and eventually Charlie Brown lands flat on his back once again. This cycle of getting your hopes up and then ultimately having those hopes squashed is unfortunately the story of the people of Ethiopia throughout the country's history. Time and time again, as a new government has taken power, that government has promised a new era of peace and prosperity, yet time and time again, that peace and prosperity has devolved into violence and oppression. This leads us to our latest threat, to the promises of a new government. The BBC reports on December 10th, the Tigray People's Liberation Front recently stormed a compound in northern Ethiopia, which has led the Ethiopian government to respond and seize several cities in the Tigray region. Now, the Tigray People's Liberation Front has an army of around 250,000 men, and they're continuing to fight in the countryside. The region of Tigray, which is where most of this fighting is occurring, used to have a lot of influence on national Ethiopian politics. In fact, they dominated the scene for 27 years. Yet, under Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, who was also the winner of the Nobel Peace Prize, they've seen their role greatly reduced, which is a large factor as to why this conflict is erupting right now. Now, this fighting has the potential to destabilize Ethiopia, which in turn could destabilize the entire Horn of Africa region and cause the undue suffering of thousands. So it's important that we understand the exact implications of this and what can be done about it. Thus, we should ask the question, how can Abiy Ahmed peacefully quell tensions in the Tigray region of Ethiopia? Well, he has to be strong, but also compassionate. There are three primary ways he can do this. First, he can end the targeting of ethnic Tigrayans. Second, he can restore humanitarian access and aid. And third and finally, he can promote dialogue and diplomacy throughout the entire country of Ethiopia. So first, let's understand that Abiy Ahmed wasn't unjustified for sending troops initially into the Tigray region. In fact, it was a necessary step to show force and demonstrate that the national government wouldn't allow the Tigray People's Liberation Front to gain that sort of control. However, things fell apart as soon as the national government started to interact with civilians and commit some atrocities. As the Wall Street Journal explains on December 10th, there have been reports that the government has specifically sought out and massacred ethnic Tigrayans. Now, these reports are muddled and right now it's a little bit unclear. But if they're true, it amounts to an absolute atrocious war crime by the Ethiopian government, and that means that Abiy Ahmed needs to do something substantial to make sure that the people who committed those atrocities are held accountable. Not only is it a matter of ethics, of course war crimes shouldn't be tolerated under any democracy, but beyond that, Abiy Ahmed needs to make it clear to the people of the Tigray region that the government is not out to get them. That the government isn't there to simply ethnically cleanse them or fight against them, but rather to simply prevent against a usurpation of power by the Tigray People's Liberation Front. If that isn't done, if Abiy Ahmed doesn't unequivocally disavow these massacres and hold the people who committed them accountable, as well as promise to not commit any of those in the future, then the people of the Tigray region, whenever Abiy Ahmed does reach out for peace and reconciliation, are simply going to look on that with deaf ears. They aren't going to think that Abiy Ahmed has their best interests at heart if he continues to allow these sort of atrocious crimes under his regime. Now, of course, other crimes were committed by the Tigray People's Liberation Front. This is unfortunately the cycle of wars. But the proper response by Abiy Ahmed isn't to continue that cycle of violence, but rather to end it himself. Beyond that, the second way that Abiy Ahmed can restore peace and prosperity to Ethiopia and the Tigray region is to simply allow humanitarian aid to enter that Tigray region, as well as ending his communications lockdown. As the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace reports on December 1st, right now international aid groups are having a difficult time entering the Tigray region due to the lockdown imposed by the Ahmed administration. And as a result of that, it's unclear exactly what's going on in the region, and reporting is kind of muffled and hard to discern. Beyond that, the people of the Tigray region aren't getting the necessary supplies and medical attention that they need, which causes more undue suffering, which is something that Ahmed can and should easily prevent. Beyond that, his lockdown on communications is in violation of international humanitarian laws, which is something that should immediately be lifted as a show of reconciliation and peace with the Tigray region. All of this leads me to my final point, and that's that Abiy Ahmed needs to promote reconciliation and dialogue with the Tigray region and also Ethiopia as a whole. He needs to be willing to listen to others and recognize that this isn't an opportunity for him to seize power. As Bloomberg reports on December 10th, many leaders in this position could use a war of this magnitude to allow themselves to become dictator, to destroy democracy, and Ahmed certainly has that option. Yet an alternative option would be to promote reconciliation, to work with the Tigray people and the Tigray People's Liberation Front and find a deal, find an accommodation that could work best for everybody involved. And if he does that, then he can continue the upward trend of Ethiopia, because right now Ethiopia is generally on a positive track. And it is up to Ahmed to continue that. As Reuters reports on October 5th, Ethiopia has, for the last decade, seen a growth of around 10% of its GDP per year. So that economic growth is entirely feasible to continue if Abiy Ahmed is simply willing to cut down his own power and be reconciliatory. So, as a whole, we can see that if Abiy Ahmed wants to restore peace and prosperity to Ethiopia, if he wants to quell tensions peacefully, then he has to end the targeting of ethnic Tigrayans, he has to restore humanitarian aid, and he also has to promote dialogue and diplomacy. If he doesn't do that, then unfortunately, Abiy Ahmed will wind up like Charlie Brown, flat on his back once again. Thank you.